consent to being interviewed and recorded
Cool.
for this project.
So, what is some background demographic information about yourself as an individual?
Well, I was born in the Czech Republic. My dad is French, my mom is Czech, so I'm pretty Caucasian. We moved to the U.S. when I was 5 years old, so it wasn't really that hard for me to pick up English, and I really only speak Czech when I'm there visiting with my mom, visiting my family. Other than that, I'm 19 and a heterosexual male.
Cool.
That is important.
It might be. Who knows? So what is metal and what does it mean to you?
Well, the problem with that question, at least to me, is a lot of people, in the metal community try and over-define it sometimes, and there's, so many, subgenres, which I totally get because it's a really expansive genre of music, but sometimes people get really nitpicky about it, so I try and not, classify it too much, I guess, because I think people sometimes get, very territorial about it, but I guess metal to me is, any form of, hard rock with, a very distorted sound, very energetic. There are certain rhythmic elements, I think, that are specific to metal, especially the drumming, the guitar riffs. So I think stylistically there's definitely some components that differentiate metal from just say normal rock. But I also think a big component of it is kind of the community that likes metal, and how I think what defines metal the most is a metal show, and what the shows are like versus
Can you talk about that?
Yeah, sure. A hard rock or I guess a rock and roll show, if we're gonna compare those two, to me is more just it's still people enjoying the music together, but it's kind of a static experience. People are moving around and dancing, but I don't know, I think the point of metal is to get a lot of energy out that you don't necessarily get out in your day-to-day routine, and that especially happens in a show because, people are moshing, they're moving around, they're banging their heads, and, and I think that's, a big part of that is the rhythmic aspect, because when you think about the first music humans really created, it was all just rhythmic stuff, and people would make simple rhythms with simple instruments and would dance around a fire, and it would be this communal thing where they all felt this pulse together, and I think that's a huge part of metal, is just feeling that breakdown or that blast beat or whatever's going on in the song, that rhythm together as a big group, and just moving around, getting all your energy out, and it's a combination of anger and release and happiness all in one, I'd say.
Right. So how did metal first enter your life, either the music or the culture, and in what ways did it start to manifest?
So it first started, I listened in middle school, I listened to the classic punk rock, pop punk rock, so a lot of Blink, Sum 41, all that kind of stuff. And then I had a friend who was from Denmark and moved to the U.S. when he was 12, so we met in middle school, and he listened to a lot of metal as a young kid, because in Scandinavia metal is really, really, really big there, and so he started showing me all these metal bands that he listened to, and that was at a point in my life where I started playing an instrument and could kind of appreciate metals again, complex rhythms and complex melodies. And it was also a time in my life where I really wanted to express myself, and all my hormones were raging and all this kind of stuff, and metal seemed like a very good outlet for that. So I think that was my first exposure. The way it manifested is I just kept listening to it. I kept meeting people that listened to it, and whether you saw a shirt they were wearing or heard what they were listening to on their iPod, I met a lot of great people through listening to metal. And though I would say it hasn't grown in a way that I listen to more and more new bands, and I'm not really exploring metal. I just kind of have the bands I like listening to, and when I'm in the mood for it, it brings me back to those days in middle school where I would just listen to these bands all the time. So I would say it stayed kind of continuous. It hasn't, my like relationship with metal hasn't really developed, but it's never. That's good, I think, in a way, because it's something like secure. You know,
Right.
it's like my relationship with metal has always been good. It's always been the same, and it's like something to fall back on sometimes.
So, I guess, do you partake in the metal scene?
Not that much, really. You know, there's a lot of bands I don't know. I'll tell some people I meet that I listen to heavy metal, and they'll ask me if I know this band, and I won't. Which is kind of funny, and I'll go to shows when the bands I know are playing, and sometimes I'll go to shows where the bands that I don't know are playing, and I'll still enjoy it because I know no matter what the band is like, I'm still going to have that energetic, like, communal experience, which is always awesome. But in terms of like knowing a lot of bands, following bands, keeping up with the metal community, I wouldn't say I'm that involved.
Cool. You answered that question already. Do you think your age, race, or socioeconomic status has affected your role in the metal scene and how you see metal as a music genre?
It's definitely noticeable sometimes, depending on. I feel like metal sometimes has this connotation where you've had to have gone through some hardship, and that's usually tied through like to socioeconomic status. That to truly understand the message that they're going for, and like I've definitely noticed that, but I know that that's wrong, and so it doesn't really affect me that much. And going to a show again, you see people of all demographics, and you don't know their socioeconomic background, and that may be because what they're wearing. The stuff people wear to metal shows, like anyone from any socioeconomic background could be wearing like a ragged black T-shirt. So it kind of brings everyone on the same level. And I also don't think many people are caring about that when they go to a show, so I don't necessarily notice it that much. So yeah, I would say the only real thing that I could kind of notice is that maybe sometimes you would think that metal, as I think you could say the same thing about rap or any genre where the lyrics are kind of dealing with hardships and expression, that someone from like a middle class Caucasian family might not necessarily truly get it compared to other people. But I don't think a lot of people in the metal community see that. Maybe compared to like rap, for example. Everyone may bash a white rapper because he doesn't know what he hasn't been through a lot, and that rap is rooted in a culture where people were creating music together to like forget about their hardships, just like the blues, for example, right? Like white boy can't play the blues, like all this kind of stuff. But I think metal avoids that a lot, which I think is super good.
Cool. Does being a metalhead affect any relationships you make, whether between parents or significant others or something?
No, my mom actually enjoys listening to it sometimes, which is funny. Sometimes my friends will like make a small jest if I'm wearing like a metal T-shirt, just because like sometimes the band names are so ridiculous that it's kind of hard not to poke fun at it. In terms of significant others, I've had relationships with people where they don't listen to metal. I've never had a relationship where someone was as much of a metal fan as I was, but I've had relationships where they've been totally open to listening to it and wouldn't mind listening to it with me. So I've never really had a problem with it in terms of my relationship with other people.
So you mentioned before that there were different subgenres. Can you go a little bit more into that and maybe talk about any particular one you relate to?
The thing, and this kind of goes back to me not being like that involved in the metal scene. I don't like. There's so many subgenres that I know about, but I don't know what a lot of them mean. I guess the way I could describe the kind of metal I listen to is it's nothing too heavy in terms of like the rhythms aren't so like off place and crazy and wild, and there's I guess it's more structured than some metals, because sometimes like metal can just be like to like an untrained ear, which could be me in some cases, is like very random, and so a lot of just like kind of like playing the instrument in a very like flailing way. And sometimes metal that's like a little too over the top in terms of like its imagery. So I don't know, for example, like black metal, for example, a lot of the stuff they sing about I don't really relate to as much. But yeah, I don't know, the kind of metal I listen to is like I kind of look for like technical death metal, for example. I guess that's a subgenre. Like anything with like crazy like melodies on like an 8-string bass, I'll find super super cool. Just straight up like southern metal, I guess, if like Lamb of God tries kind of fits into that category of like the southern metal scene. I listen to a lot of that. Nothing where this like screamo, for example, I think is really oriented towards like singing with only like high inhale screams and that kind of stuff, and like where you really can't understand what the lyrics are. And I kind of I do like the aspect of screaming, but I would like to also hear what they're singing about at the same time. So I guess the genre I listen to, because I don't really know what that would be called, is anything where like there's like some melody going on. There's rhythmic diversity in terms of like, you know, breakdowns and fast bars and blast beats, but they don't seem random. And I can hear the lyrics, but also feel the energy from the lyrics being screamed. So really, I guess just like the most musical metal possible to my ear.
Musicality.
Yeah.
So you mentioned previously that you're a musician. Do you play metal? Do you play other things? Can you talk about how that affects?
So I play saxophone, which is an instrument that you don't see in metal really ever. I started playing the bass first, and with this friend that I mentioned earlier, and we would, you know, try and cover metal songs a lot, and I really liked the bass in that setting because it had that really low note going on, and it had that pulse. You know, it's kind of, the bass is the bridge between the drums and the guitar in a lot of genres, and especially in metal, so it has that rhythmic aspect going along with the drums, and it also has that like low, powerful, buzzing feeling you feel in your chest when you're like hearing, you know, bass at a metal show. And I think that is kind of what drew it to me, because it's the combination of feeling that low, powerful note and also feeling the rhythm of the song. So I really liked playing bass in a metal setting. Saxophone, unfortunately, it's hard to find its place, but I've played with people here where we've done like, not necessarily metal because of the instrumentation, but like very like hard jams where we took like rhythms from metal and ideas from metal, whether it's like doing like minor arpeggios really fast. Like a guitarist can do it and a saxophone can do that too, and like the sound of a saxophone is very different to a distorted guitar. But I've taken licks that I really like in metal and learned them on saxophone and like tried to use them in other settings because I think they sound great. And also I've explored kind of making a distorted sound with the saxophone to kind of emulate that sound that guitarists use in metal. And there's ways you can do that on saxophone. For example, there's something called multiphonics where you play 2 notes at once, and those notes are super close together in pitch. So it's like playing a note like a quarter step or half step apart, and because of that the notes are fighting each other and you get this kind of reverb distortion sound, and it sounds a lot like a guitarist getting feedback from his amp, which I think is also a pretty like metal specific sound. That kind of feedback high squealing sound is something I can try and emulate on my saxophone, but that's kind of the extent of it, I would say.
Cool.
Yeah.
So you managed to knock out the bulk of my questions.
Awesome.
In a very short amount of time, might I add. So do you have any final thoughts or any other ideas you'd like to talk about in regards to metal?
Yeah, I think the biggest barrier metal has for attracting more people to it is, unfortunately, the singing. I think a lot of people are turned off by metal because they say, oh, it's just screaming, or, oh, it's just like random playing, and I think it's just because maybe some people have an ear that's more fine-tuned for that kind of thing and can appreciate it more. I found that my friends that play instruments tend to appreciate metal more than my friends that don't, and maybe like understanding the musicality and the skill that it takes to do what they're doing can help you appreciate it. And I think also when people listen to music, singing is very important to them because they want to hear what's being said and they want to connect, because that's the most human element of a song, is the singer. That's our human voice. And I think when people can't necessarily understand what's going on there's a kind of wall, and they can't really relate to it as much. But I think that's one of the most relatable things, is the fact that you can take something as high energy and like emotional as like a scream or a grunt or anything like that. Those are really like human sounds that you don't get to hear all day, and like put it into a musical setting. I think that's super awesome. So I think if people can kind of get beyond that and appreciate it for all its other elements, that metal would be able to start attracting more of an audience.